Good afternoon. Anna Gremling here, Executive Director of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization. Thank you for coming this afternoon to our housing presentation. I'm super excited for the next hour to see what we have to share with you. I did want to remind everyone this is the first of our speaker series. We will be coming back to this very same location on June 10th to talk about safety technology. And again, towards the end of the summer on August 25th to talk about micromobility in trails, on trails. And then in the fall, on November 4th, we're going to be talking about public transportation and stories from the street. So with that said, I'm going to hand it off to Andrea Miller, our project manager, to tell you about our maximizing value of land study.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. As Anna mentioned, my name is Andrea Miller. I'm a senior planner for the Indianapolis MPO. I hope you've been enjoying the open house and had a little bit of time to take a look at our posters. In a moment, I'll be providing the highlights from this soon-to-be published study, which examines the fiscal impact or budget impacts of different types of housing. But before I do that, I do want to provide a little bit of background on why we're doing this study and what really led up to it. So this study, the Maximizing the Value of Land study, is not the first that the IMPO has completed for housing. In 2023, we completed the first regional housing study, the Central Indiana Housing Study. And as its name implies, it was intended to provide a regional understanding of what's happening across our region. So the full housing study assesses housing pricing, availability by type, and it also compares it to what the population wants and can afford. And it also went further and proposed potential policy solutions for identified issues. And so what were, in brief, some of the findings from the Central Indiana Housing Study. We found that despite the way we like to tout our affordability for housing in Indiana, the reality is that existing residents were slipping further behind. So between 2020 and 2022, the median sales price of single-family homes went up by 31.6%. In that same period of time, rent went up by over 20%. And in contrast, wages only rose by a little under 9%. And so to put that into a dollars perspective, the median sales price of a house in 2020 in our region was $228,000. And in less than 3 years, that amount went up by $72,000 to $300,000. And so perhaps it's not surprising that we found that the rates of cost burden, both renters and owners across our region, is quite high. So for owners, we found nearly 1 out of every 4, so 24% of our owners were cost burdened, and over 60% of renters were cost burdened. And then when we looked at severe burdenship, so spending more than 45% of their income on housing, it was nearly 30% for renters and about 9% for owners. But we weren't just looking at affordability. As mentioned, we were interested in getting a better understanding of the type of housing that we had in our region. So we did an examination of our housing inventory, looking at the size and cost of housing and comparing it to what people would prefer. And we had a few critical findings from this housing gap assessment. The first, and again, given the previous slide, I don't think is particularly surprising, but we found that there are too few affordable units for those at lower income levels, especially at smaller 1 and 2 bedroom sizes. So this applied to our entire region as well as at the individual county levels. Finding 2 was that the region does not have enough smaller ownership units. So these are 1 and 2 bedroom opportunities for ownership, so things like condos, cottages, smaller homes in general. And again, this was at all price levels. So regardless of income, anyone who wanted one of these smaller ownership opportunities was struggling to find something available. And then the third finding, in contrast, the region had more mid and higher cost 3 and 4 bedroom houses than people would prefer. And that's not to say that these housing units aren't occupied, because they absolutely are. But an example of what this might look like is an empty nester who's perhaps interested in downsizing to a smaller property that's easier to maintain. So they're in one of these larger houses than they would prefer, but they can't find the smaller housing stock to downsize to. So there are many contributing factors here. Some of them are outside of our control. So things like interest rates and the cost of materials for building houses are very real and very impactful. But market forces have a greater explanation on rising costs and less so on the mismatch in the housing market stock as compared to the preferences. So when we look at those findings, the region does not have enough small ownership units, and that the region has more mid and higher cost 3 and 4 bedroom homes than it would prefer. It shows that the preferences are there, the lack of housing is not. That's not an accident, it's the result of various policy decisions we have made. And both of these findings really focus on something that is a common problem across all of the US, which is this missing middle housing, which refers to the type of housing that's between those mid-rise apartment complexes and single-family unattached, the type of housing that used to be a little more common in our country to build, but has really kind of disappeared over the past few decades. So this looks at things like duplexes, cottage homes, townhomes. It's a type of housing that we've made difficult, or in some cases, impossible to build through our local ordinances. But one thing that the Central Indiana Housing Study did not go into detail on or make clear is that this is not only an affordability issue for our residents, it's also a municipal finance or budgeting issue. And it's this latter item, understanding how the housing we're building will impact our communities, that the MVL, the Maximizing the Value of Land study, focuses on. And what do I mean by that when I say that the type of housing influences our budgets, our fiscal health? Every household within a community provides revenue in the form of taxes, primarily property and income taxes when it comes to here in Indiana. And of course, there are associated costs that come with those residences, the expenses, money spent on police, fire, parks, and your streets. So what we did is we looked at 10 different housing types of various ownership, so both rental and ownership, scale and density, and we looked at their fiscal impacts on 3 municipal budgets from across our region. So essentially, we compared how much would it cost if we just had 10 acres of one type of housing compared to its revenue, and we did that for all different scales of housing. So as you can see here, we have everything from rental townhomes everything from rental townhomes to single family of various sizes, large and small lot, that are ownership, and we went ahead and compared it. So you can see this actually exact same figure in detail on the boards outside. If you haven't had the opportunity to take a look at them, you will at the end of our presentations. But really, what I want to focus on are a few key takeaways. And the first is that higher density development is fiscally beneficial compared to lower density developments. So often when we're talking to our community members, we hear a lot of concern about the traffic and various just concerns about the ability of our city services to keep up a certain level of quality. But we found that this concern wasn't really founded. In general, higher density developments generate more property tax revenue and income tax revenue per acre. They make more efficient use of public infrastructure. So when you think about stretching out things like stormwater mains, your public streets, things like snow maintenance and filling in potholes. And it reduces the service area that needs to be covered by emergency services as well. Rental housing is also generally fiscally beneficial compared to owner-occupied housing because rental housing does not have the same deductions and caps that owners experience. And to be clear, we are not saying that this is, the number one thing that only needs to be focused on. We're not saying that, you should only be building higher density rental housing, but rather just to illustrate that this is part of the problem as well when we're talking about maintaining the level of service in our growing communities. And we also included a school district analysis, so we didn't want to ignore this facet. We understand that there are many families that locate specifically for a school district, and so we wanted to make sure that we took this into account as well. And again, we found similar takeaways. Rental housing is fiscally beneficial compared to owner-occupied. It pays higher property taxes, and there are fewer school-aged children in renter-occupied households. And similarly, again, higher density rental housing will have a higher concentration, a higher tax base than that lower density rental housing. So this was just the Cliff Notes version of this maximizing the value of land study. The full report, the written report, will be coming soon. If you did not sign into this event, register with us in the desk, please do so, and you will receive a notification when the written report is complete. So this item will be coming to you this summer. But now I'll transition us on to our next speaker. So the lack of missing middle and denser housing typologies, it's an affordability issue and it's a municipal finance issue, which begs the question, why aren't we building more of it? And that's the focus of our next speaker. Tim Corcoran, the Director of Planning for the City of South Bend, will be discussing policy changes that enabled South Bend to support diverse housing types. He has over 20 years of experience in the fields of urban design and town planning. Before starting his role with the city, he was an urban design consultant in Sydney, Australia, where he worked on a wide range of developments from large-scale city extensions to neighborhood infill projects. In 2016, he returned to his hometown of South Bend, Indiana, where he helped to lead changes in planning policy and foster a proactive approach to development. Tim's overhaul of the city's zoning ordinance garnered national recognition and earned the Dry House Award for form-based codes. He developed plans to spur downtown and neighborhood revitalization and created pre-approved house plans to provide design guidance to a growing small-scale developer community. His work to shape the city through a focus on collaboration, design, and incremental improvements continues to raise expectations that contribute to the growth and resurgence of South Bend. Here to tell us more about both the obstacles and ways to overcome them is Tim Corcoran. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you to Indy MPO for inviting me down and letting me share our story of South Bend with your community here. So let's get going. So first of all, let's see. How do the clicker work? There, it did advance. Okay. All right. So the South Bend story is one of growth, decline, and rebirth. And this is South Bend in 1890. We are on the south bend of the St. Joe River. We're a very creative people up north. We have a great city of streets and blocks, walkable neighborhoods, pre-automobile, great neighborhoods. We had some of the most innovative companies in the United States. Mayor Pete called us the Silicon Prairie of the United States at the time. And this was our downtown in 1928. And we grew. We grew quite rapidly, peaking in population in 1963. And we absorbed that population primarily through missing middle housing typologies and even subdividing further the properties that we already had. And these are just some examples from South Bend, examples that I use when I talk to residents and neighbors in our neighborhood planning efforts to show them, hey, these things aren't scary, they're in your neighborhood, and they're beautiful buildings. But like a lot of other Midwestern cities, we sometimes think we might have been the first to really experience this industrial decline that started to hit a lot of communities around the Midwest. You know, the term Rust Belt didn't exist until this started to happen. We also have the rise of suburbanism in the suburban housing. We have household sizes that are declining across the country. And urban renewal, another great idea that destroyed most of South Bend in the process. And the consequence is population decline. We lost over 30,000 people between 1960 and 2010. And to give you an idea of what decline looks like, this neighborhood, Lincoln Park, had 237 homes in pre-1960, and by 2023, only 97 remained. Newsweek called us one of the 50 most dying communities in the United States, casting further doubt on whether the city will be able to recover. So how do we change this, this pattern, this downcycling of our community, this extraction of people and value? And it really starts with a mindset shift. And I say think different kind of with a question mark, because you can think different about a lot of things, but it's really about like thinking about all the things that you need to do in order to change the trajectory that you're on. And so this is a phrase that is kind of paramount in the way we think, is that no one's coming to save you, right? This is the idea that whatever problem your community has, it really is on you to try to solve those problems. So no one's coming in to help. You got to try to figure it out yourself. And for us, what this meant was that we had to, figure out how to address our challenges and then do the things that were necessary to drive change. And for South Bend, this meant a proactive approach. When I talked to other communities around the country about this, it became quite clear that sometimes they only had like one planner or one engineer. And how are you going to fix and heal your community when you don't even have the staff to do these things? So hiring staff to manage change, land control and acquisition to drive the ideas that you're trying to develop, neighborhood planning and engagement, code reform, fostering development partners, addressing infrastructure costs, and elevating design expectations are some of the key things and themes that we've been working on. And this guy, Jeff Ziegler from Revitalize or Die, another kind of phrase that I think about a lot is, even if you think you're doing well, just like the people in South Bend did in 1960 or 59 say, hey, we're doing great. What they didn't know is just around the corner, things were going to start turning bad pretty quickly. So even when you think you're doing well, you need to think about how your community changes and evolves over time and how to make it resilient. So our challenge was really to, we know we need more people to be competitive in a national, regional, and national environment. We need more people. New development must be financially productive for the city. It must make us money rather than lose money. We must heal our city through infill development. And something is not always better than nothing. And this is this idea that you kind of have to believe in yourself too, is that sometimes it's worth waiting and taking a pause on certain types of development in order to get better development down the road and to foster that development. So, Andrea talked about a lot of things that are kind of national issues that may need national solutions. Housing supply, demographic changes, interest rates, that was a good one, I should put that on there, construction costs and labor. But there are also national solutions national issues that we have local solutions for. For us, a lot of South Bend has an appraisal gap where the cost of new construction is more than what it'll appraise for in many of those damaged neighborhoods. How do we fix that? How do we fix that housing market? The regulatory brain damage that can go with new development. So, we think about like regulating what matters. Can we legally build the city back the way it was? And when I started my job 10 years ago, you couldn't. And make the process as easy as possible to understand. And also there's, we're from the Midwest. We have this ingrained suburban bias. And I talk to my mom about this all the time. She loves her backyard and there's nothing wrong with that. But we have to understand the fiscal implications of urban and suburban development patterns. And check to see if your zoning code is biased against urban outcomes. So getting into a little bit of data, the first thing I want to talk about are some cars. And how do you compare cars when you're going shopping, right? So if we think, do we think about cars as like miles per tank of gas? And if that's the case, the Ford F-150 is the clear winner here. But we don't think that way, do we? We think about miles per gallon, and so the little BMW there in the middle gets the furthest, gets the most miles per gallon. And this is kind of this per acre tax value that Andrea mentioned earlier. This is our assessed value as like just how big a tank of gas is. All right. This map is the map of St. Joe County. The reds and purples are the highest value properties in the county. The greens are the lowest value. The gray is county parks. They're non-taxed. And, I like this map. It's kind of pretty. But I don't know what it says about St. Joe County. I know St. Joe County. I know there's a lot of farms. But where are the towns? Where are the little towns? Where are the cities? You can't really see them in this map. I want to focus on this thing. This is a steel mill, all right, the Iantech steel mill near New Carlisle in the western side of St. Joe County. And you can see that it's kind of red and purple there. But when you go to per acre tax value, the steel mill disappears, all right? This is something where you think like that steel mill must be generating tons of assessed value, but on a per acre basis, it doesn't. And what's interesting is like it kind of disappears in this map. But now the towns and the cities start to pop out. And when you take that and project those values off the map and you look at them in like the z-axis, you can really see where downtown is now, right? Those values are not just in the purples, but they're producing multiple factors of value. So that's the steel mill, and that's Embassy Suites, that tallest spike there. This is just near the University of Notre Dame. But what if we look at the productivity of the city versus the county? We have 6% of the county area, but we generate 29% of the tax value with 1:5 ratio of assessed value. Or downtown versus the city, we're 0.9% of the land area, 4.2% of the taxable value, 1.46. And if we look at downtown versus the county, we're 0.05% of the taxable area, 1.2% of the taxable value, and a 1:22 ratio of value. And you can tie all that back to building typologies. And so what we have here is a matrix of building types and density and their return on investment for the city. So across the top, residential, mixed use, and commercial, and low, medium, and high. And what we find is single-family homes generally lose the city over $2,000 per acre in revenue, whereas you just have to switch just a little tick up into medium density to start to see that revenue-generating building typologies. Now, it isn't to say that we won't build or don't build single-family homes. We do. We build a lot of them, or we've built a lot in the past. We haven't built a lot recently, working on it. But it just means that we need to think about how do we make these other things as easy to do as single-family. And demographic changes are happening. We have, in the 60s, we had, only 56% of our population was non-traditional nuclear families, and that number increased to 80% in 2023. And the consequence of this is that it means we need more smaller units. I feel like they knew what I was going to say when they asked me to come down here. Maybe that, so we did not coordinate. I just want to let everybody know. This diagram. So these are the types of units that can provide this gentle density into existing neighborhoods, and like I showed at the beginning, unit types that are already in our neighborhoods that we can point to that are beautiful and can fit seamlessly into neighborhoods. So we need some of these too, the apartments as well. And this just represents exactly what was said earlier, that on the left you have lower value per acre, higher infrastructure cost per acre because everything's spread out, there's more pipes, there's more roads. And on the right, higher value per acre, lower infrastructure cost per acre. Now, we make single-family houses very easy to build. We actually make apartments pretty easy to build, but we do not make this easy to build. We make this purposely somehow very hard to do. We've got zoning, there's NIMBYs, there's building codes that aren't regulated or proportionally regulated to the building typologies, there's fire code. financing, condo regulations, stormwater regulations, and more that I can't think of at the top when I started making this. But there's a lot of things that make it hard. Some of these things we cannot influence as a local community, and that something that maybe we can lobby our state government and fire marshals to like think about things like fire regulations, and do we need sprinklers for a 4-unit fourplex when it's the same size as a lot of the houses that we're building today? So how do we proportionally regulate these different building typologies? Because a fourplex is considered the same as a 200-unit apartment building in the code, in the building code. But again, these are the things that we use to address our housing issues in the past. So, you know, they were neighborhood scale, they were financially productive, they were affordable, and they addressed those demographic changes that were happening then and are happening now. So for us, what we've been doing is an incremental approach to code reform. And this is a story of my first day of work, and there was a retail shop that had been vacant for a long time. There was a new user coming in to fill the space, and there was a house on another side of an alley, and the zoning administrator at the time said, well, you know, if the business wants to start back up here, we got to get them to comply with the zoning ordinance, and it was going to require a buffer yard to residential, and then there was a hedgerow, and there was 2 trees for 25 feet, and then the parking minimums kicked in, and so they were going to have to buy more property to buy the parking lot. And I didn't actually say why. I said something else, but I was like, this does not make any sense. And he said to me, "Don't worry, Tim. We'll be favorable for a variance." And I said, "But why would you put somebody through this process when you are going to give them a variance, when you're going to be favorable? And you know, the BZA might be in a bad mood that day, and they won't grant them the variance." And he's like, "We've always granted this variance." And I'm like, "This is dumb. We should just get rid of the rules that don't work." And so here we are looking at that. So we got a consultant, we got some planners, scale rulers, we had a CDC council member there in the background, and Incremental Development Alliance helped do this work, where we started to draw those missing middle housing typologies on existing city of South Bend lots, and then tested it against our current ordinance to find out what things about missing middle were going to, you know, in our code were broken, and how the two things didn't match up. And so you got to test your code by drawing it. I encourage everybody to draw and draw and draw as much as you can. It really helps you connect the words from a piece of paper into like a real drawing to see where, again, your code works and where it may not work. And so we did this code audit, and what did we find? Okay, that, you know, we reviewed commonly requested and variances that were granted often. Off-street parking minimums were a problem, landscaping, clear sight triangle areas, things of that nature. And that our code did not consider any implications to the fiscal implications of development typologies, and that our existing code was really difficult to navigate, and it was not calibrated to South Bend conditions, so the lot types, the existing lot types in South Bend. And so what we did is we looked at those lot types, the common lot types, and how you could combine them or uncombine them to create and to facilitate different types of development. And we also looked at data from AARP and other places that really help justify things like accessory dwelling units and how people want to live in place in their neighborhoods. And so, you know, this is all the data that we collected when we started thinking about our code reform process. In terms of the process, what I did, this was 2018, and I don't know if there's any sort of planners in the room that remember or heard about the process that Austin, Texas was going through at the time, where they had spent millions of dollars and years on this really cool and innovative code, and when it went to the council, the council voted it down. And I was like, there's no way in the world that I'm going to go through this process just for the council to vote it down. You know, I would have a mental breakdown. You know, I was like, why did I move back to South Bend just to get hammered like this, right? So I had this idea of quick fixes, because, you know, it's just a quick fix. It's nothing major. Don't worry about it. It's okay. And so we made incremental changes to our existing ordinance, and we started with cutting red tape and those variances that we always granted 100% of the time. Everybody likes to cut red tape, doesn't matter who you are, what political party you are, everybody likes that. And what it does is you start to build trust with your council members as you start to come back multiple times. And that what we would do is we continuously add more and more complexity, like getting into, like we created a missing middle housing zone. But don't worry, it's not mapped anywhere. So it's not like just because we adopt this new zoning district, it doesn't mean that people are going to start building fourplexes everywhere in South Bend. And they're like, oh, so it can't happen? I'm like, no, it can't happen right now. But see, so don't worry about it until we actually are doing neighborhood planning processes in the background to remap neighborhoods, again, one neighborhood at a time. But we got a whole missing middle district adopted, and none of these, or all of the public meetings that we had, the council voted 9-0 in favor of every one of these packages. And I think it's because of the process that built this rapport and this trust with the decision makers. And so what's great about this is it allows for focused debate on particular issues. And so not one issue can kill the entire process. So every time you get something passed, your ordinance is now a little bit better. All right. Now, if there's something about historic preservation or height or whatever, and some developer or some group is really angry about something in particular, they cannot kill the entire process. You just focus on that, and you can put it aside for a moment and come back to it later, move on to something else to continuously improve your ordinance. So, it doesn't stop the whole process that built that trust with council for further changes, and it allows for that continuous improvement to happen. 3 years later of quick fixes, we had a brand new ordinance. And in the process, these are kind of the highlights, but we created that new missing middle district. We permitted accessory dwelling units on every parcel in South Bend. We reduced setbacks, minimum lot sizes, eliminating off-street parking requirements, limited cul-de-sac lengths. We legalized every lot that was in the city, so it made sure that every lot that was there was a buildable lot, regardless of when it was done, up to 2020, and that's when the ordinance took effect. And then from there on out, the new subdivision ordinance would ensure that all the lots would meet those standards, the new standards. We cut 250 pages out of our zoning ordinance. I actually had my colleague drop the old ordinance and the new ordinance on the table so that people could hear the difference. We cut out, from 460 land uses to 66. We made the document way easier to read and administer. I don't want to administer a broken code any more than you want to comply with a broken code. It makes my job easier, so much easier to look at development projects and how can we get them approved faster, and you can do that if you've got a good code that is easily to administer. But most importantly, we eliminated all those suburban bias things that prevented us from building South Bend back the way it was. And this is a picture of what our old code looked like, code written by lawyers. This one's written for people now, diagrams and images and things that make it easier to read. We cut out a lot of jargon and made it a little bit simpler to read. Thanks. Yeah. So we have sort of mini codes within the code, and this is one of our districts. So you illustrate the intent of the district, you describe the intent, you show what can be built, you show how to build it, you just make it easy, all right? The idea is like anyone with a high school education should be able to open up your zoning ordinance, understand if they can build a house on the lot that they've acquired. And we won an award. But what does it mean? All right. And it didn't mean a whole lot, actually. So we're not one of those communities where there's a lot of growth. We're in a slow growth city and a slow growth county. And so just because you made it easier to develop didn't mean that all these developers started flocking to South Bend going, oh man, we can do fourplexes now? Cool. No, none of that happened. So there are limitations to what zoning can do for you, all right? A good ordinance does not mean that development will magically happen. It didn't happen. It does not ensure good development, and it may not stop bad development. But it is a good starting point to shape and influence new development. And this is where a lot of the work comes in our jobs. How do you shape a project? I always like to tell my team, the answer is always yes, but, and then how do we get it over the line to make it compliant, to make a better outcome? And so to do that, you have to sort of change the culture, changing the development culture, changing kind of expectations of what people have expected in the past, that idea of believing in yourself, both as sort of a staff member, but also as a community. So one of the things we did is we started to develop our own developers, if you will, especially on those vacant lots. No home builder had come to the city, since I don't know when, in 100 years. So no one was coming to say, hey, I'd love to build on all those vacant lots that you have. Not at all. No one did it. No one came to us, right? And so there's always well-meaning people in your community who want to make positive changes in their neighborhood. They just don't know how to do it. So we started teaching people how to do it. And these are events that we would do where we would bring together people, city staff, bankers, other architects and others, so that people could talk to each other and network and learn about how they can share skill sets in order for new development to happen. And we brought in the Incremental Development Alliance. They did a boot camp that teaches people how to do a pro forma and read zoning ordinances and things of that nature. And that really got people kind of coming out of the woodwork, that got them really interested in development. Now, out of all the people, how many people actually did work? Not that many, but you start, again, it's incrementalism is sort of the most powerful thing that we can kind of kickstart in all the things that we do. Because once you start getting one person, they start having some success, more and more people start to want to be a part of that. We also work with a group called Neighborhood Evolution. This is a company that actually started in South Bend, and they do development coaching. They do one-on-one development coaching. So when people kind of graduated out of those boot camps and were looking to do their first project, maybe they own land, and they had some money and they wanted to do something, these guys come in, they kind of help with pro formas and other things to kind of shape and mold a project. We also did a lot of neighborhood planning. We've done over 13 neighborhood plans for the city. And this is where I do most of the public engagement. I find public engagement to be most effective at a level like this. It's a little bit of a higher level. We can talk about things like missing middle housing types. We can talk about demographics. We can talk about streetscapes changes and things of that nature, because you're having a lot of those one-on-one conversations. And in our zoning ordinance update, we didn't always talk to residents kind of in the same way, because it's very technical, a zoning ordinance, like who's got an opinion on the site distance triangle from an alley to a street. I think, like, I don't want to have a debate about that. I want an engineer to tell me, like, this is a good distance and I can be okay with that. So a lot of the concepts that are in the zoning ordinance and things that we talked about there, we talked first at a neighborhood planning level. And we would do things like look at the zoning map, and the beigey areas or the lighter areas are primarily single family. And those brown areas is that missing middle district that I talked about. And so before we did the zoning updates and before the neighborhood plan, this is what the land use map looked like. And afterwards, it looked like this. Now, we had just passed this change, right? We got that district passed. Don't worry about it. It doesn't apply anywhere because it's not mapped. Well, now it is. And now it applies to a lot of places in this particular neighborhood. So we got one thing through and then figured out how to make it legal in like sort of neighborhood by neighborhood. So going the extra mile, raising expectations, and that proactive approach. So we, land control was a big deal for us, still is. We had acquired over 600 parcels of vacant land in the city, mostly through the county tax sale process. Land control is, in my opinion, like I want to keep buying as much land as I possibly can in order to facilitate new development and find those partners to do that development. Otherwise, just kind of random things happen, and I don't like that. Raising expectations. So this was zoning compliant but poorly executed, and I kind of say this is kind of a typical South Bend story, and that's the saddest tree in South Bend right there. But the bottom one is also zoning compliant, but the difference here is we worked with the developer, and the bottom one worked with them a lot, pushing them to try to do something better, and we got a much better Dollar General, all right? It's not great, who cares so much about Dollar Generals, but it's now the best Dollar General in South Bend, so when the next dollar store comes around, I go, you gotta look at that one on the bottom, and if it's not as good as that, it's not gonna be approved. You can try to make it better, right? So this is this incremental approach to raising expectations. There it is, a close-up. And this is a lot on, it was city-owned parcel. It's in a really interesting part on the west side of South Bend. We had put a lot of money in a streetscape project that a lot of small businesses had started to that first day of work story takes place down the street here. A lot of these vacant buildings were being rehabilitated and new ownership coming in, and somebody wanted to build a grocery store, which, if you're a planner and you do neighborhood engagement, everybody wants a grocery store, and if you, you could put a grocery store in every corner, I think, and people would still not be quite happy about how far away they have to go to a grocery store. But so I was like, this is amazing. This guy wants to build a grocery store. We convinced them to build it on our property in this kind of redevelopment area. And he came to us with this, and it was like a steel shed. Hey, but we put brick on the front, and I was like, yeah, okay, this isn't bad, but what if I did this? I drew them a new site plan, and I showed them why they need to put the building in the front, put the parking in the back. I showed how the loading would work, where the the aisles would be, the cash register, and how you could have shops and utilize our facade grant program. And every shop that you have, you can get up to a $50,000 match by using our facade grant program. And and you could have other little businesses in there and collect rent and blah blah blah. And showed them, like, maybe you could do this instead. So our architect for the facade grant program kind of sketched this up, and they came back with not quite that, but not bad. Like, as a brick building, the windows are much more proportioned, and 7 years later, we got it built. It took a long time, and the project manager had never built a building before. In fact, his job was to sell refrigeration equipment to grocery stores, and so I have to give him a lot of credit for getting this building built. It's probably one of the nicest pure commercial buildings built in South Bend in, like, I don't know, again, 100 years or something like that. And they didn't know what they were doing when they started, and I think this relationship that we built with them over those years helped drive this really great outcome. And the day they opened, they told us they were expanding already. So it's kind of an amazing story. And this is what it looks like. It's a real, it's a real grocery store. It has all the things that you would want, but it's a locally built, locally owned grocery store. Now, when I talked about suburban bias, a lot of people think this is good. This house is a good house, and there isn't anything wrong with this house. We don't stop houses like this from happening, but when it came to our code, and it was facilitating mostly houses like this, even on infill blocks. And when we talked to those folks in the neighborhood, those well-meaning folks that I mentioned earlier, this is kind of the idea that they had about what is good and what they wanted to build in their neighborhood, but it wasn't zoning compliant. It wasn't going to fit on a 30-foot lot, which is what a lot of South Bend is already platted to be. And so, do you have to tear down another house, combine two lots together in order to get something like this to happen? No. So they would come back, and this agreement that we had, we got this is what they came back to us with. So we had a lot of conversations about what we wanted, and they came with this, and I was like, what in the world is this turret on the side of the house? This is a developer. They had never built a house before, but they had a developer agreement with the city to build 5 houses, and the city was going to help address that appraisal gap in this area. So we were putting money into the project, and so I felt like, yeah, I think we can get something better. Because this is what South Bend looks like. Never take photos on trash day. And this became the genesis of our South Bend pre-approved housing program. It was really a design issue for us. We have pretty quick turnaround times for permits. We usually can permit a house in maybe by the end of the day, by the end of the week. It doesn't take that long. A lot of people talk about pre-approved plans from a permitting point of view, but ours was, how do we skill up some of these small-scale developers, the only people who are starting to work in these inner neighborhoods with all these infill lots to deal with. And so we wanted to show that how could you intermix missing middle housing and new housing with existing housing, much like the neighborhoods that exist in South Bend, and using a lot of those examples that I showed you at the beginning to show they're not that scary, it's going to be fine. It makes your neighborhood a better place, more resilient. You can, if your kids move out and you've got this big house, you can maybe move into a smaller home in in the neighborhood that you already live in, and you don't have to leave the community and the people that you're friends with and the people that you know. And so we came up with our first 5 house types that became pre-approved houses. We started with an ADU because we permitted ADUs across the city, so let's do that and give people an option to build ADUs. The next one is called our narrow house. The narrow house was specifically designed to show people that they can build on a 34-foot wide lot. A standard house, a stacked duplex, and a sixplex, and we chose all of these very intentionally. The sixplex, we thought we might do a fourplex, but it wasn't. We did pro formas on each of these, and so the pro forma for the fourplex wasn't really penciling out, but once we moved up a little bit more in density to the sixplex, it started to make financial sense to do that, and so we pivoted to the sixplex. We have probably 20 different types that we'd like to do. But again, we didn't always have the funds to do everything we want to do all at once. So let's just start and incrementally add to that. So now we have 10 housing types, including some townhouse types, a bungalow, and others. And each of them have some facade variety. And they're real plan sets. These are plan sets that are usually even better than what you would get if you were to go to a builder. Shows you how to site your house on a corner lot, an internal lot, a front-loaded versus a rear-loaded lot, house plans, elevations, and the details. Sometimes, it's oftentimes those little details that really make a house kind of cute, and the cuter it is, the people love it. And the more they love it, the more they love their street, their block, and their neighborhood. So these little details matter. And but sometimes our builders don't know how to build these things anymore. They tend not to know how to make some of these, again, little details on porches and things. So making sure that we add to these details to show people how to build these things again. But we also found that our infrastructure costs were extremely high, and that depending on which side of the street you're on or which street you're on, you could find out that the pipes underneath the street could be really deep, and the deeper it is, the more expensive it is to hook up to the sewer and water lines, or if the water line was on the other side of the street, that can add costs. And these are all kind of hidden costs that a developer doesn't really know what those costs might be. You just see a piece of grass and on one side of the street or the other, and they all seem equal, but the underground infrastructure can really make huge impacts on the cost of redevelopment. One estimate that we got from one of these developers was like $35,000 to dig up a brick street, go 19 feet below ground to reconnect the sewer and water line. And when you're talking about a house that might cost $200,000 or $250,000 to build, that's a huge one-off cost for something that the homeowner expects to work. All the time you expect that the water will turn on, your toilets will flush, and it's not like it's an investment into granite countertops or, other things that people can see and touch in the house that you would then go, oh, that makes this house more valuable. So, looking at those one-off infrastructure costs can be a deal breaker oftentimes. So we created a fund of a grant for up to $20,000 to help reconnect infill lots back to our main sewer line. But we also need partnerships to get a lot of this done, and these are just 9 examples of different partnerships that we made that when you total them all up, 223 new units of housing that are either now built, under construction, or permitted. 110 of those are pre-approved plans. But the city did put in over $11.1 million into getting this done, because that is the cost of fixing a broken housing market in the areas that we're working in. And these are the first 2 pre-approved plans that were built. These are new side-by-side duplexes that are being built. These are also pre-approved. This is a stacked duplex, and it won the Home Builders Association of St. Joe County Award for Best Floor Plan, Curb Appeal, and Kitchen, and we missed out on Best Bathroom, but I'm working on that for our next round. It's a city-designed plan, and we win the Home Builders Association Award. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about, right? This house is also net zero in its construction, or nearly net zero in its construction, so it's a highly sustainable house as well. And this is our duplex production starting in 2004. And can you guess when our zoning ordinance changed? Right here. And so, we've been able to get a lot more duplexes built in South Bend and mixing these into our existing neighborhoods. This is a single-family house. This is a duplex, not a pre-approved plan, but one that was recently built. And oh my gosh, this cute little ADU in the back that I really love. It's about 520 square feet. Other duplexes, townhouses, ADUs, smaller houses, modern houses. These are 600 square foot net zero tiny houses. The first urban fourplex in 100 years is a guess that one of my team came up with. A cottage court, we allow for cottage courts to be built, and these are the first 2 units of that cottage court under construction. And these are those houses at the beginning of the slide deck. These are from Habitat for Humanity with a partnership with the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture. They came out, all the students and faculty and Father Dowd came out to build these houses, and over the course of a couple weeks, 5 new houses sprung up across the street from those first 2 pre-approved homes. And what was this neighborhood that was full of vacant lots has got a lot of life, and it's really pretty amazing to see. Yeah, and so here's that neighborhood again, and we had a groundbreaking with a partner that we've been working with to build this first house. And there it is. And they're going to do 20 more, and there they are, or they're starting to be built. But we've got an agreement to build 92 new homes in this neighborhood. It's going to completely change the way this neighborhood has been. This neighborhood has seen this vacancy for a generation for sure. And this is already having such a huge positive impact for this particular neighborhood. And so those 600 vacant lots, we have 300 that are now either filled, permitted, or committed. These are some of our housing permit data, and this is sort of let the market figure it out, and that's that proactive approach. And for the first time since 1960, South Bend permitted and built more housing than all of unincorporated St. Joe County. And so what was a declining population is now turning a corner. And we gained 3,000 people between 2010 and 2020. Looking forward to the next census to see how far we've come. And with that, thank you very much.
All right, so we do have an opportunity for a little bit of Q&A. So put your thinking caps on for something you might want to ask Tim, but I will kick us off with one. So as you've expanded the amount and scale of planning done by South Bend, have there been any positions or roles that are outside of typical city planning work that you feel has been particularly impactful?
Well, I think that we've been working a lot with CDFIs in South Bend. We have a CDFI-friendly South Bend program, and they've been really instrumental in helping us understand development financing and getting mortgage help for these small-scale developers in places that a traditional bank typically hasn't been working. So understanding that financing part has been a really important sort of piece that's been missing oftentimes with development.
Yeah. Interesting. Oh, go ahead. All right, appreciate that.
Thanks, Tim. I'm Mark O'Neill. Have you seen progress yet? Maybe it's too early on that appraisal gap. And do you have any local banking partners who are starting to kind of get comfortable underwriting, or do you have to say the CDFI route?
Yeah, so to your first point, it is getting better, and sometimes in a way that the development partners aren't comfortable with, because they're so used to, that the appraisal would be relatively low, that it would make that house very affordable for the folks moving in. Oftentimes they might be income qualified. A lot of the homes that were built do have some sort of affordability component to it, not all of them. And they're starting to appraise for much higher than they expect, and they get a little weirded out because now they're not affordable anymore. And so the anecdotal evidence is yes, that the gap is decreasing. We haven't done quite that study to figure out exactly how we've gone from, say, upwards of $100,000 gap in appraisal versus construction value to what it is now. And obviously that changes depending on what part of the city we're working in. So it's a good thing that, it's something we want to look into a little bit more, but we're pretty busy just building away. And the second part is yes, some banks are starting to come around and also come around to not only providing mortgages for single-family homes, which they've always been pretty comfortable with, but also looking at how we can work with them to do some of that small-scale missing middle as well.
I think you can hear me. Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. Really cool information. One of the things that I noticed that for all of the ideal settings, the ideal development, it included wide sidewalks, it included multimodal transportation infrastructure. And I find that at times, having done code reviews, having done zoning and all of these different things, making sure that we're thinking about that mobility and transportation piece as we're redeveloping, especially in infill development, becomes really important. And when you were talking about the grocery store potentially becoming, a multi-store, multi-destination type of development, another thing to really think about is about the circulation for everyone within the site. Because of oftentimes American planning and American transportation thinking, we don't think about anything but vehicles. So I just kind of wanted to ask you, the question I guess is, how are you making sure that you are advancing South Bend's priorities in multimodal connectivity in transportation with all of this?
Sure. As you pointed out, when new development happens, the new sidewalk goes in with it, which is a really important part of, that imageability of a neighborhood and how, again, that neighborhood sees itself. And I think new sidewalks are kind of like this weird thing of my neighborhood's getting better. If you could just put in new sidewalks, I think people start to feel better about their neighborhood. So that's one really tangible way that, increases the walkability of a neighborhood. And so that's always part of a new development. But when it comes to cycling or the buses and things of that nature as well, that probably fits more into the work that we do with our public works department of adding new bike lanes or shared use paths or other other alternative modes of transportation that we're in the process of doing as well. We're building a new pedestrian bridge to connect trails together. A lot of our major streetscape projects now include either a shared use path or a dedicated bike lane as well. And we also work quite closely with Transpo, our sort of regional bus provider.
And just relating those two, because with the housing component, you have housing churn with the constant flux of housing makeup and type. So I see a rising need to be thinking about both of those together, the housing and the transportation. And I look forward to following your great work in South Bend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you use or consider OTIF for neighborhoods that were really vacant?
Yeah, initially, no, because the requirements to set that up were kind of made it difficult, but I know the regulations have recently changed to make that a lot easier to do. So we have now set up about 4 residential TIFs in order to help recover some of the value back out of the investment that we put in. So yeah, we just added those 4 TIFs last year.
When you went on your shopping spree of 600 lots, which I love, but did you run into challenges getting approvals for that and finding the funds?
Well, getting them was sometimes easy and sometimes hard. Some years the county, so these were lots that went on tax sale. And we weren't going out looking to, purchase those properties from homeowners or property owners. So there were a ton of vacant lots that went on tax sale, and we would try to pick up as many as we could. Initially, it started by focusing them in particular areas where we had a neighborhood plan or there was a CDC actively working in those neighborhoods. So kind of finding those places where we had some strength to build from, even if it was small. But yeah, we worked with the county. Some years they would give us the land and not ask any questions. Other years they just never got back to us, or they didn't talk to us for whatever reason. We'd always have to justify every time we did it. So it was kind of I don't know, like I was like, why is this relationship not working the way I think it should be? Why aren't they just giving us this land that's just cycling through over and over in the tax sale process and never really going anywhere? And so that conversation has now led us to starting a 3-county land bank in northern Indiana to help address that. And the county St. Joe County just adopted a resolution to work with the land bank so that in the future we'll be able to get those tax sale properties first and get them off the list and stop that sort of cycling through the process. What I would say is that having 600 vacant lots is not a fun thing to mow, and there are maintenance costs to all of that, and you have to be kind of creative in how you manage that. A lot of what we did is, whether it's the pre-approved plans where I didn't know if anybody would build one when we did it. I mean, I had no idea. I really hoped somebody would build one of them, like to justify it. I guess there's always this sort of leap of faith of like, is this going to work? And, like, I don't always know if it's going to work or not. And whether it's a change to the zoning ordinance or some of the neighborhood planning that we did or the pre-approved plans, or like, how do we pick up all these parcels of land not knowing if anybody's going to build and how we're going to manage all that. But it kind of goes back that if we don't do it, no, clearly no one has done it. I mean, we waited 50 years and no one asked us to do any of this, so we might as well start trying to figure it out ourselves.
Yeah, here's one. How do you think about the value of private consultants, such as like urban planning firms, economics, analysis firms, like how, because consultant firms sometimes they work with a community for a year, but they're creating a plan for like 30 years in the future. And how do you think that process works towards your benefit on planning this long-term revitalization of the neighborhood?
So, I was a consultant for 12, 13 years, and what I found, though, when I moved back and I hired a few consultants to do some things, was that initially I was not happy with what they did. And it changed the way I have like a relationship with the consultants that we use. I think now of them more of being like embedded temporary team members. And so, for instance, our zoning ordinance update, we hired somebody from the Incremental Development Alliance who used to work at Opticus, which is one of the biggest code writing firms or innovative code writing firms in the country. But she was working by herself at the time, and so I said, let's hire her. We can do this. You know, we have a lot of the knowledge. We know South Bend, but there are things that we're not good at. We're not good at the graphics. We're not good at the document design, or we could do it, but it's going to take a lot of time and effort for us to do. So it's really, that's where the consultants started to really make a lot of sense. But then it's like, how do you kind of think about them as like embedded employees almost, and so that you're really moving forward very, very much together, and it isn't like a consultant telling us what to do. It's we're working together to figure out the outcomes we want and how to achieve those outcomes. Since then, I think things have gotten a lot better. So when we utilize consultants, we're very clear about the things that we want from that. And so it's really just thinking about, again, how do you utilize the additional talent to generate whatever it is that you need. So, you know, the cool part here was that the woman, her name is Jennifer Settle, and she found was like 2 or 3 other stay-at-home moms that had been working in like firms to do different things. And so our whole ordinance was written by moms, and it was great. I mean, it was one of the coolest parts about it was that these are folks that had, you know, been working in really innovative companies, but had made other choices and wanted to still remain relevant. And we were able to find these people, kind of bring them all together, and utilize all their skills to create, you know, a brand new zoning ordinance. And so, yeah, it was a really fun process. So that's kind of how I think about it.
I guess kind of speaking of the team dynamic, was there a big change with the in-house capacity, what you all were able to do, and as the program grew?
Yeah, so when I started, I had 3 staff, and we did not have, zoning was not a component of, we were in an area plan commission at the time, and the county administered our zoning ordinance. And that was like just this recipe for disaster. There was no, and like, they're all very good people. I'm friends with them. I like them. There's nothing, they're great. But they didn't have the resources to change things, which is why a lot of those code changes had never happened. And they're just like, it was easier for them just to like write a favorable staff review rather than spend the time to get rid of the bad things in the code. So I was lucky that the mayor realized that if we were going to start our own plan commission, which was what we were doing, that he allowed me to hire a new zoning administrator a year before we had the new code even written. And so the zoning administrator actually got to help write the new code. And so when it was adopted, we understood it so intimately on day one that allowed us to be successful in that, right? And I think that goes back to that hiring staff is important, and you know, if you don't do it, it's going to be difficult to manage whatever the changes that are important to whatever community you're working in, because if you don't have that, it makes it hard.
I guess, has the city looked into live, work, housing? Is that something that people are interested in, or is it too complicated? Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, we're building actually about 8 units of live work in a new development project downtown. So yeah, we're open to all sorts of different types of housing typologies. So we're working on this. It's actually part of a low-income housing tax credit project where the ground floor, to get that sort of walkable ground floor and that interactive ground floor, they're doing live-work units on the ground floor. So yeah, we're kind of an all-in housing type of thing, from we're building a low-barrier intake shelter to luxury housing and all the things in between. And so yeah, when people come to us with ideas like that, we're really encouraged, because those are typologies that often are a little difficult to get done. Sometimes because people don't really understand them as much as we'd like them to, and so there's some other challenges there. But for the most part, yeah, if people want to do it, we're really interested in that.
We have time for one more question.
Can you elaborate on how the rental market has been, especially smaller units like 2 or 4 units, given the student population?
Well, yeah, the student population is interesting. So the University of Notre Dame, a few years back, mandates that their students live on campus through junior year. So the rental market is not as, student rental market isn't quite what it maybe was in the past. So when it comes to just the general rental market, it's hard for us to say exactly what's happening in the sort of the neighborhoods, but we're in the process of building close to 1,000 new rental units and apartments downtown. And so, that demand is strong. We've done market analyses to show that, there is a lot of room in our market for that. And so, we're moving forward with different development projects in that sense. But I think probably the biggest sort of challenge between, say, the university and the city is more of very extremely wealthy alumni buying houses and living or only using them for 6 to 8 weekends a year type of thing, or renting them out as Airbnbs. And so the short-term rentals in a certain part of the town is perhaps really skewing the housing market in that area, making houses way more expensive, and thus the taxes are going up, for the neighbors who still live there. So that's probably the bigger issue versus student rentals in neighborhoods.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tim. We really appreciate you coming out here tonight.
Thanks. I do have a question for you, because I often wonder about this, but do you get the joke? Okay. All right. I presented this in Charlotte, North Carolina one time. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, John Mellencamp? They're like, oh, yeah, okay. All right. Well, good. Thank you.
Thank you.